Hello and welcome everyone to today's Association for Manufacturing Excellence webinar titled How to Engage a Reluctant Workforce. I'm Jerry Strohmeyer, the Education Training Program Coordinator for AME, and I will be your moderator. Today's presenter is Paul Critchley, President of New England Lean Consulting. Paul is a recognized thought leader on employee engagement and management interaction with over 20 years of senior level manufacturing, engineering, and operations management experience. He co-authored his first book titled The Whole Professional, a collection of essays to help you achieve a full and satisfying life, which brings a fresh perspective on work-life balance and how individuals and organizations can work together to achieve greater levels of attainment. Paul is an AME board member in the Northeast region. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering and holds 2 Master of Science degrees in Management and Organizational Leadership. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. You will see that you are muted on your attendee panel on the right side of your screen. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into your question area in the attendee panel and click on Submit. We'll review the questions at the end of today's presentation and answer as many as we can. When you log off today, please check your email inbox, and it will be an invitation and link to fill out a short webinar attendee survey. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey today, as your feedback is very important to us to improve future webinars. Paul has graciously agreed to provide a PDF of today's presentation. We'll be sending that along with a recorded link for a webinar replay to each of you next week. Now I am pleased to introduce Paul Critchley, who will present How to Engage a Reluctant Workforce. Take it away, Paul.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here this afternoon, depending on where you are. So I want to talk to you today about how to engage a reluctant workforce. So we'll get right into it. So I like to frame the conversation by talking about what work really is. And in simple engineering terms, so Monday through Friday, we have about 120 hours available to us. And let's say, for sake of argument, that we actually get 8 hours of sleep, which I'll show you in a few slides. Not a lot of us do, but say we do. So right out of the gate, we have about 80 hours available. So if you assume a 40-hour work week, you're split 50-50 between what we call work-life, and hence the term work-life balance. So a couple of rhetorical questions just to think about as we frame the conversation. When was the last time you worked 40 hours? I'll tell you, many Americans don't. On average, it's about 47 and a half, right around there. It also doesn't include any time commuting, or what we call planned time apart. The average commute, again, here in the U.S. is 26 minutes one way. So if you double that, that's another hour. That's gone. Planned time apart. I'll tell you, my wife and I spend, probably 20 minutes every Sunday night going through what we have for the next week. We have 2 daughters, 9 and 12, who are pretty active. So we'll say, okay, well, if you can pick up Hannah from school, I'll grab Emma, we'll bring her to the dentist, and then we can grab something to eat on the way, get her over to dance. If you can pick her up, I can go to Zumba, that kind of stuff. And parents in the audience, I'm sure you can relate. So you pack all that stuff together, and then you think, even, sometimes if your weekends are tied up doing stuff with the kids or family, maybe you have to mow the lawn or shovel snow after work or before work, right? And all these things add up, right, to take time away from us. So ultimately, what I'm telling you is we spend more waking hours with our coworkers than we do our families, right? And our families, if you think about it, these are the people that we marry, right? We say we're going to spend the rest of our lives with, our children. And we don't see them as much as we do the folks we actually do work with. So why do we do that? Why do we get up every day at 5:30, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and leave the people who mean the most to us? We have to get something out of it, something other than just a paycheck, some sort of intrinsic value. So some statistics to share about what the state of the worker looks like. In 2016, the NSC showed that 76% of 2,000 workers that they surveyed reported that they felt tired, which is easy to understand, right, based on the slide that we just showed. A lot of us tend to not get 8 hours of sleep because we don't have a lot of time just to ourselves. So, we'll stay up late and binge watch, last season of Game of Thrones or whatever to try to get caught up. So, because it all comes out in the wash, right? So 53% said they felt less productive than they really could be. 27 said said they had trouble making decisions, and 27% had actually fallen asleep at work in the last month, which was admittedly higher than even I suspected it would be. That's almost 1 in 3. So that's a pretty big number. 2016 Career Builder study said that 55% of workers felt, what they said, they felt overweight. Again, it's tough to find time to go to the gym to get that exercise in. We have all these other things that are biting for our time. 44% had actually gained weight, and 25%, I don't show it here, had actually physically gained more than 10 pounds. So it just goes to show you that, again, with all these things that pull at us for our time, we tend to let other things slip. And this was the big one. 2015 Gallup poll showed that 68% of workers felt either not engaged in or actively disengaged from their job. And that's a big number. That's 2 out of every 3 workers. Now, I show you these things to kind of frame this conversation, because when we talk about lean is a pretty big deal. There's obviously the 2 pillars. There's continuous improvement and respect for people. And it's hard to get people excited, from the respect for people side, when we come out as lean practitioners and managers and say, hey guys, we have this fancy new whiz-bang thing, and it's called lean, and it's going to completely transform how we do business. In the context of all these things I've just shown you, it's easy to understand why people kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, like we have time to take on one more thing, right? So in summary, workers who are overtired, overweight, don't feel engaged in their jobs, so they leave. And I'll tell you this number, when we first started giving this presentation years ago, the number of Americans who quit their job every single month was right around 2 million. Now, it's actually up to 3 million. And that's not including people who get laid off or fired or retire. That is flat out, I quit and I'm going to work somewhere else. So that's a big number, 3 million people. So what happens when somebody leaves? And I'll tell you, this just happened to my wife in her department. Somebody left, and thankfully their management team agreed, because not all of them do, that they did need that extra person. So they start looking for them, and you guys know the drill. You have to phone interview, you have to vet, you have to place ads, you have to have them come in, do on-site interviews, all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff takes a lot of time, money, and effort. Well, as those things are happening and going on, the work that person who left used to do still has to get done. So my wife did what everybody in her group did. She started taking work home with her. And a couple of nights a week, she'd be in the office here in our house doing that stuff. Well, again, that's just more time taken away from all of these other things. So again, it's really easy to kind of, when we frame it that way, it's easy to understand why people maybe aren't always 100% on board right out of the gate when we talk about making changes. And in this case, that change would be lean. So here's our definition. There's lots of definitions of lean that are floating around. We developed this one just because we liked it, right? So it's a way to engage the workforce and continuous improvement so everyone can be happier. So more employee engagement is happier workers. There's lower turnover, lower absenteeism, right? And that helps because you don't have to have extra effort from the people who did show up or have stayed to make ends meet. Better quality. Studies show that people who feel more engaged in their work and don't feel like they're just punching a clock actually have better quality because they take a little bit of more ownership. And it's easier to balance work and home. Again, just as we showed in the previous slides, there's a lot of things that pull at us for our time. So if you can walk into work and know that things are going to be relatively go to plan, it helps everybody understand what's expected and helps them attain what they expect of themselves and what their managers expect of them. Happier managers. Again, better quality, so it's fewer, customer phone calls maybe that they have to field when things don't go quite as planned. You can lower your lead time. This is a popular one that we talk about with our clients when they engage lean. They say, you can actually lower your stated lead time to the market, and maybe you get a little more market share. Maybe you can charge a little bit more for your product, and that's a good thing because it doesn't really cost anything. We talk about eliminating waste and taking non-value added activities out of the value stream, and fewer fires. I'll tell you, my work history is all on the shop floor. I was in manufacturing for more than 20 years. Firefighting is one of the least favorite things that I ever had to do. And, I think that's probably true for a lot of people, right? Because it totally doesn't go to plan. These things pop up and they have to be taken care of right away, which means everything you planned on doing gets put on the back burner. And ultimately, more employee engagement equals happier customers. Customers don't like to call and complain that their on-time delivery is no good, that they have to reduce their prices and all that kind of stuff. They have things that they need to do too. So how does Lean help? And I won't read these exactly to you. You can look as I'm talking to you. But when we talk to business owners, managers, CEOs, a lot of times we talk numbers. Of course, they want their employees to be engaged, but a lot of times these are numbers, folks. So we talk numbers. We talk about decreasing direct labor hours, reducing overtime, reducing floor space, reducing lead times, that kind of stuff. This chart I borrowed from Mark Graben, and this is from the Children's Medical Center Lab in Dallas, Texas. They engaged Lean several years ago, and these are some excerpts from job surveys that they had done. And as you can see, all of these scores went up. Topics include, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. So maybe it's not pushing papers or filling out reports that don't really matter to anybody. It's actually doing what you went to school to do, or really what you care about, what you get that intrinsic value from. I feel secure in my job. Stress at work is manageable. So all of these scores went up, and you can see in the grand average went up by about 3/4 of a point, give or take. So that's pretty decent. That's almost a 20% increase. So why the resistance, right? Excuse me. So, we just talked about, well, it makes everybody happier and, lowers costs and all these great things. So why would anybody be resistant to that, right? It doesn't make logical sense. Well, because psychology is at play a little bit here. And ultimately, it boils down to you can't convince somebody else to do what you want. Now, of course, you can pull rank. So you can order somebody that reports to you, say you will do this, but they generally will do that only to comply, not because they're necessarily invested, right? And everybody's favorite radio station is WeFM. What's in it for me, right? Dr. Mark Jabin, who I encourage you to do some Google search, he's an MD, and he's done a lot of research to this end. He calls it the hidden brain. And really, it's subconscious kind of stuff. This is the part of your brain that filters everything that you see, do, hear all day, every day. And when we, as Lean practitioners, go out to a shop floor in an office and present, you can almost see it sometimes on people's faces, even though they may not realize it, that the hidden brain is at work. And what it's doing is it's filtering everything that we or you say, and ultimately can come down to these three things. They may not agree with it. They don't see a way that it can be successful, what is being proposed, or they don't think it's worth the effort. For those of us who have been around long enough, sometimes we'll hear, oh yeah, I remember when this was called TQM, right? Or re-engineering was around for a short period. So this kind of has that flavor of the month feel to some folks. Now, this is a quote that we have used, and it's especially poignant, I think, here, especially with what's going on in the news, especially lately. People in positions of power tend to act in a self-interested manner and display reduced interpersonal sensitivity to their powerless counterparts. And again, we see that, but you see that, and I'll use my history. I've seen CEOs, general managers, plant managers leave their office, go out on the floor, and yell at people, say, well, you're not meeting your metrics, and if you can't do it, I'll find somebody who can, without really asking a lot or any questions about, well, why, here are my expectations. Why can't we seem to get there? Help me understand so I can help you attain them, right? That doesn't happen a whole lot. So again, this is our typical approach, and this is the reason why those conversations happen. So a popular example I use in this flow chart is parents of teenagers. So stick with me. Have you ever come back home and say, all right, listen, and I'll use our daughter's name, Emma. Emma, your bedroom's a mess, right? And we've talked about it before, and it's still a mess. I want it cleaned up, and you can either clean it up, or if you don't, by Thursday night, I'm not going to let you go to the movies with your friends on Friday. So what's it going to be, right? So we wait till the end to ask the question. You see this again in business. We say, hey, our on-time delivery is no good. I want you guys to do something about it. You need to meet this. And if you can't do it, right, again, I'll find somebody who can. So you make the choice whether you're going to make it or not. But you're not really setting anybody up to win, to succeed by framing the conversation that way. So again, we talk, why would anybody resist that? So I think we can all we may have all been in that. I certainly have been in that position before where, plant managers staring at me saying, what are you going to do about this? Well, it's easy to feel attacked, right? And when that happens, the brain activates the amygdala, which is that little small peanut-shaped part right in the middle. That's your fight or flight mechanism. So again, if you feel attacked or your brain, is telling you that, hey, this person, right, is attacking you, your first instinct is fight or flight. Maybe you get defensive. Also, your brain tends to defend its story. So if you've made a decision about some topic and somebody challenges that, your natural inclination is to defend that story. To say, no, I made a logical decision, and here are the reasons why. It's hard to have a logical conversation, especially if your amygdala is activated. There's also this I win, you lose. We talked about trying to find win-wins. So if there's a perceived loss of face, so in other words, I change my mind based on what you said. So I've, in a sense, lost a little credibility. That generally doesn't go over too well. People will sometimes look for a way to get, air quotes, get even with you at some point. I had a CEO boss one time who told me, never apologize. Even if you're wrong and you figure out later that you're wrong, I don't want you to apologize because it's a sign of weakness. I'll tell you, I didn't last long at that company because I couldn't operate in that kind of an environment because I just didn't agree with it. So instead, here's the lean approach. Folks on the floor, let's say for sake of argument, your on-time delivery is less than what you want it to be. Odds are the people who are involved in that value stream out on the shop floor know that. They may not know the exact percentages, but they know what the problems are because they run into them every day, all day long. If you go out onto the floor and say, hey, what can I do? And this is a question we use with our clients. When we're on the floor, we ask a machine operator, what is it that the company can do that would make your job easier? Sometimes it takes a little bit to pull that out of folks. But once you get the ball rolling, really a lot of great ideas can come. Again, these are the folks who deal with this every single day. So they're going to know best. But you're never going to know those answers unless you ask the question. In our example with on-time delivery, you'll get what you want eventually. If you can take, again, we know it as taking waste and non-value add out of the process. They may not know it that way. They just know, hey, my job's a lot easier because I'm not running around looking for a tool that I need. And that ultimately gives you what we call a shared outcome. Their job is easier, so they go home less frazzled, right? Feeling like, hey, I actually got accomplished today what I wanted to. And your costs go down, your on-time delivery goes up, your safety is better, your quality is better. You discuss those options together as a group or a team, and then you can make those choices. You can say, okay, well, I think we'll get the most benefit out of doing this, so let's go do that. So really, it's about asking those questions more up front versus at the end. So when we engage, anytime I've been involved in engaging folks with lean, it's funny how the normal distribution will pop up, but it's true here as well. You can expect a normal distribution as far as what people will assume. You'll get some early adopters, and these are the folks, and we'll talk about these in the following slides. These are the folks who will grab on immediately. There's a big chunk right in the middle there, where we call the maybes, and those are folks on either side of the mean. They will tend maybe towards supporting or tend maybe towards not supporting. And then you'll have the other tail end, which are the dissenters. And we'll talk about them again in a couple of slides. But it's really what you get down to. It's all about adjusting the standard deviation lines to try to get as many people over on the right-hand side as you can to garner support. It's an ongoing initiative. You can't expect that, 1 or 2 or 5 meetings or an all-hands meeting is going to, rally the troops and everyone's going to be excited. This is really kind of a boots on the ground, get your hands dirty kind of thing. Those are when we see lean transformations be the most successful. And you really have to consider where the person is coming from, and you have to address them from there. Just like in the examples I showed you, when we're talking to business owners, they care, generally speaking, they care about the numbers. We're talking to folks on the floor, they may or may not necessarily care that, the company makes more money, because maybe they don't see that in their paycheck, but they certainly care about, having their jobs be a little bit easier and spending less time frantically doing things, right? So we'll talk about the early adopters. These are the folks who see the value of lean quickly. They aren't afraid of change. They're excited for something new. These are the folks who really want to make a difference. And this is a great, this speaks to them. It's right up their alley. These are the folks who tend to be driven to succeed and tend to be people of influence. And I say they aren't necessarily managers. Sometimes these are folks who have grown up, I'll say, on the shop floor, or in, a certain level in the office, and have worked their way up. So they know what it's like to have to deal with all of these other small problems that the higher ups may or may not see if they're not good at going to the Gemba and spending a lot of time with the frontline folks. These are people who are possibility thinkers. So what I like to tell folks, leverage these folks early. Get them on board. You'll be able to tell who they are. So get them on board. They can be your biggest cheerleaders to try to help bring some of the other folks along. The maybes. This is the most important group. This is the biggest group. Spend the most time here. And again, you're going to see shades of support or maybe not so much. These are folks, they tend to like to reserve judgment until a trend emerges. These aren't going to be your front runners. Your front runners will be the early adopters. These are the folks who, if there's an early adopter whom they trust or have a relationship with, they're going to follow them, which is true on the left-hand side of the mean too. If some of those maybes know and trust a dissenter, they can tend towards that. That's why we say this is a critical group. Sometimes they'll default to a wait-and-see position. They want to see if it's going to be successful or not. We call them fence sitters. They generally don't like to necessarily make a decision or be the person to be perceived as an early adopter. So they'll reserve judgment, kind of see where the trend is going to take them, and then they'll jump on board. Sometimes, and we've heard this, you get the air quotes, I just work here, so I punch the clock and I do it. If this is what you want me to do all day, that's fine, I'll do that. But again, they tend to be observers. These cannot be top-level folks. Lean starts at the top. It has to be supported. If you have a maybe and they're in the top, people will grab on to that leader's example, and it can really thwart your lean transformation. So you got to be mindful and be careful of that. And then my personal favorite group, the dissenters. These are folks that they're highly skeptical. Predicting failure is a hobby. What I mean by that, these are the folks that anytime you talk about really anything, they'll say, oh, that'll never work, right? To some extent, it's a victimless crime. So they'll say, yeah, lean's never going to work. So say you try a lean event and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. Maybe something happened, or, there's a plethora of different things that can happen. So if it doesn't work, these are the folks that are going to throw their hands up very quickly and say, aha, see, I told you so. I told you it would never work. If the lean event does actually work and produces some good results, you won't hear a peep out of these people. And generally, no one really calls them out for it. So again, that's what I mean when I say it's kind of a victimless crime, but they really like to play that game. They're keenly negatively aware. They're good at pointing out all of the things that can go wrong. These folks see everything as a fight, whether it be positive or negative. So instead of working in collaboration, coming up with ideas, trying to support that shared outcome, these are the folks that use that term even, well, I'm going to fight for this or I'll fight for that. And it has a negative context. If this is a person of influence, lean is absolutely dead on arrival. Don't waste your time trying to influence them. You're not going to succeed to force compliance. Again, if you're a top level person is a dissenter, they just flat out don't believe it, even though you can have everybody below them on board, it's just not going to work, because they're not going to allow the time and effort it's going to take to have a successful lean transformation. So my advice is don't waste your time. So when we talk about roots of resistance, really comes down to three different things. First one being fear, right? So new things can be scary. We're creatures of habit. We tend to get up at the same time. We drive to work the same routes, that we go to the same places. So when something like lean comes along, it can be very uncomfortable and therefore fearful. So one of the first questions people will say, well, how is this going to affect me? This lean thing sounds like they're not going to need me anymore. So am I going to lose my job because of this? Perceived loss of control. If we write down all of these things in work instructions or routers, then I can see that they may not need me anymore. And in extreme cases, it can activate the amygdala, which again is that part of the brain that's fight or flight. And if that's the case, it's impossible to engage with an associate if that part of their brain is activated. They're not hearing you when you explain, no, you're not going to get fired because of this. It's really, how to make your job a little bit easier and delivering more value to the customer. They flat out just plain aren't hearing you. So things you can do is address through proactive communication. And again, it's not a one-time, two-time thing. It takes a lot of time and effort, especially if somebody's fearful. Jobs, let's call them what they are. There are main sources of income for many of us. And without that, there's we can't buy food, we can't pay the mortgage, your car payment and insurance, all that kind of stuff. So it can be a big deal for some folks. And it's important to set up clear goals from the beginning so people understand. They like to have a roadmap, right? They like to know where they're headed, know where they're going, know what the goals are, and see how you're actually planning on getting there. It's a little bit more comforting. Pride is the second one. These are folks who need their worth verified. These are keepers of what we call tribal knowledge. So again, if we're going to take all these things that these folks just have in their head and write them down in a work instruction or a standard work document, they see that as what their job is. That's the value that they bring to the organization. So if all of those things are suddenly taken out of their head and on a piece of paper, it takes their power away a little bit. Again, these are folks who have seen things and people come and go, right? But they're the steady eddies. A lot of times these are the folks who've, worked their way up to like a shop floor supervisor, and they've had many of the jobs that are below them. These are the folks when a setup person or an operator can't figure something out on their machine. These are the people they call, and they can come over and they can figure all that. They know which knobs to turn and buttons to push to make things work. That's a source of pride for a lot of folks. And when we talk about standard work and those types of things, lean tools, again, it can bruise their pride a little bit. So address these folks through early engagement. And really, these are the folks that it's important to talk with to find that shared outcome, that they understand that, no, you're not trying to take anything away. You're actually, need to engage them. They're the smart people, right? These are the folks that know what they are running up against every day. And they need to understand that they're really still the owners of that. They need to be involved in the process. So don't just ask them, hey, how do you do this? Write it down and then put it in the book somewhere. Really help them own that. Help them own that book. They're still the keepers of that knowledge. So it can help, quell any fears that they may have that they're not going to be as needed. And ask a lot of questions. Again, these folks have been around, presumably for a while. So they know a lot of what these issues are. You just have to ask and listen and understand, where they're coming from and what value they can bring. 9 times out of 10, these folks want to add more value. They just maybe don't always know exactly how, but that's our job as lead practitioners. And the third one, unfortunately, is a victim. These are folks who shed responsibility. When a project doesn't go quite right, these are the folks who will, that will say, well, I couldn't do it because this happened or that happened, or, whatever, right? Insert excuse here. They blame others for their problems, right? It's never my fault. It was always because somebody else didn't do their job and I couldn't do mine. These folks tend to point out problems and offer no solution. They say, well, this is an issue. But when you challenge them to say, okay, well, what ideas do you have? All right, we understand that, yeah, we're not making deliveries, or our costs are too high, or, whatever, there's an issue, but, what ideas do you have? Well, I don't know. That's for you guys, quote unquote, you guys to figure out. That's management's job. These folks are a tough nut to crack. The best route I found is you address through a performance improvement plan, a PIP, which is simply just saying, listen, these are the things that you're doing, and you write the stuff down. These are the things you're doing, and these are what I need your help to be able to do. And you can try to engage them in that. And again, I'm a big proponent of engaging them early, asking questions. But if this is almost a character flaw, and I hate to use that term, but sometimes it just is. So you try that performance improvement plan. Sometimes that'll work. Oftentimes it doesn't, and you have to remove them. Now, one caveat here, lean is not a way to reduce headcount to save cost. Absolutely, 100%. However, in the context of this conversation, these folks are a cancer, and they will thwart your lean transformation, 9 ways from Sunday. It's going to make your job and the job of your lean transformation team enormously harder, if not impossible. So sometimes you have to make that tough call. It's not one I personally have made had to make that call a few times in my career. It's never fun, but for the greater good, sometimes it has to be done. So again, ask questions first, then listen. And it sounds almost cliche, but you'd be surprised. A lot of us really don't do such a hot job at this. It really involves, and a lot of times you have to pull these things out of folks. So you really have to actively listen. You have to maintain the focus on the shared outcome. If people ever perceive that it's not shared and it's really all about you or all about the company, again, you can activate that hidden brain, that amygdala out, and you'll start to get resistance. So try to keep that focus on the shared outcome and develop options together. And this isn't about coercion, right, or manipulation. And there's a popular quote in some management training about what do you think you could do to meet my expectations? And one of the examples, like from my history, was, we role play where an employee is late to work numerous times. And that's the question is, well, what do you think you could do? Because the assumption is he who says it owns it. I'll tell you, I'm not a big fan of that. Because again, it's really just putting the person on the spot. And it doesn't necessarily engage them in actually why. Quick story. I had a maintenance guy who was normally very prompt and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden he started getting to work, 10, 15, 20 minutes late. And it was pretty consistent. And I'll tell you, my first inclination was, what is this guy's problem? Like, why all of a sudden, what is this issue? And, I was a little bit, I won't say angry, but I'm miffed maybe. Well, I remember this lesson. So when I talked to him, I said, Fred, up until like a month or so ago, you were always on to work on time. Now all of a sudden you're not. What's going on? So he said, well, can we go talk about this somewhere else? So we went into my office, and lo and behold, what happened was his car broke down and he didn't have enough money to get it fixed. And so this guy was walking 4 miles to work. And now mind you, this was in December here in Connecticut. So it was plenty cold and dark at that time. So here's this guy, he's walking 4 miles to work in the dark, in the freezing cold. So yeah, he was a little bit late and he was trying to get there on time, but it's hard to nail down, especially at that distance. So, we worked something out where, kind of under the radar, we got some folks to help give him a ride, because he was embarrassed. He didn't want everybody to know that, he was having trouble making ends meet. So it would have been real easy for me to just call him into my office and read him the riot act, but I really had to remind myself, no, you have to, let's start by asking questions first, right? And you make choices that are mutually agreeable. And again, this isn't a, what do you think you could do to meet what I want you to do? It's a, what can we do together to make this work for both of us? And I like to say this, you have to get investment, not buy-in. Buy-in is kind of an overused term that you really use that as when you convince somebody else that your way is the best way, they're bought into it. An investment kind of indicates, again, it gets back to that shared outcome, because both people get something out of it. And the getting out of it isn't just that I'm not going to yell at you for not doing it my way. They actually get some positive benefit. So just a few bullets here to kind of help when you're involved in those types of discussions. Don't oversell it. Let lean do the talking. Lean's been around for a long, long time, even before the term was coined, 30 some odd years ago. So you don't have to sell the jargon. It makes logical sense. So let lean or continuous improvement stand on its own. No moms or dads. So in other words, you have to make sure that you have a united front and that all your management team is on board. If you have a CEO, manager, whomever that undermines you as a lean practitioner or the team with what you're trying to accomplish, that's going to proliferate pretty quickly, and that's going to be a pretty big crack to try to overcome. So you have to make sure everyone's on the same page, and always be respectful even when you disagree. The key to this is really about building relationships and trust. People will follow you if they trust you, even if they're not too sure about what you're proposing, right? Again, some of this lean stuff is new to folks, even now when it's almost 2018. So you have to be respectful and make sure that you're focused on that shared outcome, and try not to make people feel defensive or like they're giving something up in your stead. Make a mark, don't leave one. So in other words, touch people's hearts, right? Put some investment into them, help them learn something new, so they can help deliver more value to the customer, more value to the business. By leaving a mark, what I mean is, the hierarchical, typically what happens, which is, hey, costs are too high. I want you to fix it. If you can't fix it, I'll find someone who can. Challenge gently. It's constant, positive, gentle pressure, right? Keep going. We're doing the right things. Keep up the good fight. Build credibility. Get out on the floor. Lean is hands-on. You can't just show up, at the beginning, at the end of a Kaizen event and say, hey, guys, this is an important project. And then at the end say, hey, this is great. Thanks, guys, for doing this. And then leave and turn around and walk out of the meeting. It's really about rolling up your sleeves, going shoulder to shoulder with people, getting in there, getting dirty. And I say Nike applies, so just do it. And then I have one final story that I think really puts a decent point on this. These are some pictures of one of our clients, which is a public school system. So the backstory to this is they had done some redistricting. And with this particular school, they had a lot more students than they typically had in the past. Now, they come up with and they knew this was coming. So they came up with what they thought to be a really good plan on how to load their buses in the afternoon to deal with these added students. So you can see here over on the left, how they used to line their buses up were in three waves, waves 1, 2, and 3. And in the upper lot was where they would pre-stage wave 3. But what happened was the school year started and things didn't exactly go to plan. You'll see this school has 3 exits, one here in the north, here in the middle, and then on the south. Students would leave from all 3 exits, depending on which part of the building they were from. Well, when kids would leave, they had, especially from the middle, they basically had a 50-50 shot at guessing where their bus was going to be, whether it was to the right or to the left. And during our observations, they guessed wrong half the time. Now you can imagine a third grader, walking down the line of 4 or 5 buses, only to get to the end and realize their bus wasn't that way. They have to walk 4 or 5 buses back to the middle, and then another however many to get to their actual bus. Now, this school had 800 students in it. So, you figure there's probably at least a couple hundred kids that guessed wrong. So as you can imagine, it took forever to get these buses loaded. Now, wave 1 could leave before wave 2 was fully loaded, but wave 3 couldn't go anywhere until both of them were gone. So it took 32 minutes to load 800 students. And what was happening was students were getting home much, much later than had been advertised. And that only goes so far. And in this case, it went about 2 or 3 days before the superintendent started getting some angry phone calls from parents because it was messing with everybody's schedule. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration. So during our observation, the principal, who was kind of like the floor supervisor, as buses came in, he'd call it to the office and announce it, so on and so forth. Well, there was a lot of confusion about what buses were where, what buses were in what wave. Kids were getting released too early, too late. It was just mass confusion. And as we watched the principal, he had a walkie-talkie and he's talking to the office. He's getting red in the face. There's a lot of confusion about who needs to be where, what buses were here. There's buses that, didn't make it in time or had broken down. It was chaos, right? So 32 minutes, it's very high energy, high emotional energy. We finally get through the whole thing. So the business finance manager was there, the superintendent was there, the principal and I, and kind of met. And we said, okay, do we want to kind of talk about everything we saw? And the principal literally put both of his hands up. He's like, guys, I can't. I don't have anything left in the tank. And you can see it on his face. So we said, okay, no problem. So we came back a couple of days later, made a few, we did some training with some folks in the office, calling out buses, just to change, so they understood, so they had a little bit of standard work, so they understood what was expected and that kind of good stuff. Because even though it was a small school, it was amazing to us how the messages could get crossed in translation. We are able to get the going from 3 waves down to 2. They actually had a lane you can see here. They actually had a lane that they only used in the morning. In the morning when they do drop-off, buses would come down this lane, and this is a lane for parents. In the afternoon, parents do not park here to pick up their kids. They have to park here or in the upper lot. So that was an open lane. So we said, well, why can't we use that lane? And they kind of looked at each other and said, we never even thought of that before. So we made sure it was safe because we're going to have students crossing there. So a couple little, housekeeping things to take care of, but we were able to utilize that lane. So that got us down from 3 to 2. One of the biggest things we were able to do, and you can see right here, is just add a simple whiteboard. We modeled this after terminal, boards in an airport. So the first thing you do, really, when you go to fly, is you go check in and you check the board to see what gate you're in. Well, the kids are no different. So now what they do is the first thing they do when they come out, especially from the middle, is they go to the whiteboard and they see, is my bus to the left or to the right? So long story short, after we implemented these things and did all these things, we were able to load the same amount of students in 20 minutes. The biggest change, though, and that's great. So, it makes parents happier, right? Because now their kids are getting home when they expected them. The biggest change, though, was in the principal. After we did all these things, we implemented on a Friday. And, it was great weather. And the principal, again, he was out there and he was kind of directing traffic, but it was easy. Everybody knew what they needed to do. And he was, giving hugs and high fives to the kids. And it was really great to watch. It was just that contradiction between the way he had operated and looked before versus now. And that's the real power to lean. And that's ultimately why we do what we do. And it was great to see. And that's the power of this whole thing. So those are the stories I wanted to share with you. I hope you guys got some good tips and techniques out of this. So I'll throw it back to Jerry. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. And now we'll review any questions. If you do have any questions, please submit them on the right side of your screen. Here's one. My boss is kind of on board, and I'd like to get them over onto the invested side. What advice can you give?
Sure, that's a great question. Happens a lot. I'll say you have to put it, first blush, you have to put it in terms that they care about. If they really do, if they care about employee engagement, there's lots of data out there that can support that. If they really care about the numbers, whether it's quality, cost, on-time delivery, safety, put it in those kinds of terms. There's lots within Lean that, there's lots to like, right? It's just a matter of trying to tune into WeFM, right? What's in it for him or her? What do they care about? So try to do that and see if that'll work. And again, maybe try to put it within the context of the normal distribution. So I'm not sure where they're at, necessarily on which side of the mean. So it's important to maybe understand that as well. But it sounds like if you said they're kind of on board, so I'd say they tend towards the right-hand side of the distribution. So you probably have a pretty good chance. You just have to try to find what they really care about and prove to them that Lean can help those directives.
Okay, great. Our next question is, our management team are all Lean believers, but our frontline staff is mixed. What should we do?
Good question. So if the management team's all on board, that's a big part of the battle, right? Again, if somebody at the top is not on board, it's remarkably harder. The front line, again, can be sometimes iffy, depending on what their level, if they've been around for a while. Again, a lot of them have seen things like this come and go. They've seen managers come and go, and they all have their, seemingly their pet projects. Really, I think it's about communication, and just asking a lot of questions. Show them that, really, it's all about trying to help you guys, make your jobs a little bit easier to manage every day. And use examples from history. You can say, hey, you remember last week we had that one job that, we had to scrap because this happened or that happened. Well, that stuff wouldn't happen if we engaged with this kind of stuff. And let me show you why. And really it's just talking about that kind of stuff with people at that level. And again, it's about building relationships, building trust, and leveraging those things.
Okay. Our next question is, believe in everything you have talked about, but what about better sustainment of Lean improvements?
That's a good one. There's a lot of statistics floating out on the interwebs about, 95% of Lean transformations fail, or 90 or 85 or whatever the number it is. I personally don't believe in any of that because, Lean, you're never really done with Lean. So I don't know how anybody can say their Lean transformation is complete or if it's failed. What we say is, as long as you're making improvements and you keep going, right, and you keep trying, then you're winning. So sustainment's very hard. It's the hardest part. People, especially you'll see it in a Kaizen event, usually about the second day, people really start to get excited about the possibilities of making a lot of changes for the better. So that's when you really see the floodgates start to open. And, you make as many changes as you can by the end of the event. And then what happens, you have your closeout usually on a Friday, and then the next week comes around and it pretty quickly that exuberance will dissipate because everyone goes back to their quote unquote real jobs. So numerous Kaizen newspapers have turned into wallpaper. Sometimes you'll knock off another 2 or 3, but people will revert. So when it comes to sustainment, it's really about, it takes effort, but it's really about building that into the culture and the DNA of the company, which means, right, management has to ask those questions. They have to challenge towards those ends, and they have to help folks get there, whether it's training or just, again, rolling up your sleeves and going out there, spending time with folks. That's really, I think, when we see what we call lean transformations or lean initiatives really succeed. It's when it's not hierarchical. it's a pretty, relatively flat organization, and folks are able to openly communicate and raise up issues and that kind of stuff. Hopefully that answered your question.
Okay, great. Looks like we've got one more question. You mentioned firing people. I thought in Lean, you should never fire people.
Well, we say that, Lean's not a way to, sometimes people will engage in Lean because it saves cost. And by save cost, they interpret that to mean fire people or get rid of them, right? Because you don't need them anymore. That's not what Lean is about. Toyota somewhat famously doesn't fire people, even when their workload goes down. They spend a lot of time cross-training or training or, what have you. When I talked about firing people, and I'm not saying that, you do that quickly. Certainly it's something you have to consider, and I'm all for giving people second, third chances. But ultimately, when we talk about dissenters or people who play victims, depending on where they're at within those spectrum, sometimes you have to make that tough call, because again, if those are people of influence, maybe not a manager, but even, if they're a shop floor, person, and they've been there a long time and they have the trust and respect of some people, they can lead them away from Lean. So they're going to make your job that much harder, again, if not impossible, depending on to what level they take their dissension. So sometimes, quite frankly, you're just better off as an organization without those folks around. And it can hurt. I'm remembering one instance from my history where I had an engineer. He was brilliant, but was just not a believer in the direction we were headed. And I gave him numerous chances. We spent, I can't even tell you how many hours just talking about those things. And ultimately, he even admitted himself, I can't get myself to believe in this. So we had to part ways. And he understood, it was probably one of the easiest times I've actually, physically had letting somebody go, because he fully understood. He's like, even when he left, he said, I kind of knew this was coming. So, but we did it with respect. We didn't do it with, any kind of authoritarian, you screwed up and this is why. We just said, you know what, we're sorry, but it's just not working out. And I even told him, I said, hey, I'll be a reference for you. And he found a job, shortly thereafter, because again, he was a brilliant engineer, but for what we were doing and where we were going, it just wasn't working. It wasn't fitting. So we had to make that call.
Okay. And Paul, can you identify early adopters in the hiring process?
One thing I like to do, so you kind of can. Yeah, so it depends on what kind of questions you ask. I like to ask a lot of questions for examples. We sometimes we'll fall on these behavioral interviewing questions where we'll say, tell me about a time when, something worked out or something didn't work out or you didn't get along with somebody. So I like to press folks on their Lean knowledge. Like, tell me about a time you were involved in or led a Kaizen event. And you can kind of get a feel for what kind of a believer they are based upon their answers. How many books have they read about Lean? There's lots of them out there. What did they think about it? And I'll even ask, I'll say, hey, have you read, I'll just pick one, The Lean Turnaround by Art Byrne, or The Machine That Changed the World by Womack and Jones. And if they say, hopefully they say yes, those are kind of two book benchmarks, but I'll say, okay, well, what did you think about that? What really spoke to you? And you can kind of get a feel for how passionate they are about this kind of stuff. It's that passion that's going to drive the respect for people part, and the respect for people part is going to help you with your sustainment. Without that, it kind of devolves to just being a bunch of tools. And that's where I think a lot of folks will stumble when it comes to the sustainment piece. The tool part's kind of easy, right? Because they make logical sense. It's the respect for people part that we tend to struggle with.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for all your questions. And thank you, Paul, for the very insightful presentation. We will be sending a recorded link for a webinar replay to each of you next week, and this brings our webinar to a close. Our next scheduled webinar will be on Thursday, December 7th, titled Collaborative Problem Solving for Efficiency and Innovation with Dr. Min Basseder. Please visit AME.org under the AME Events and Training tab for more information and to register. Please don't forget to fill out the short survey that will be in your inbox. Thank you everyone for attending and have a productive day.